Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about a book. In this case, we're talking Discworld again. Yes, Orb Scepter Throne is coming. I'll start talking about it hopefully tomorrow. We'll see how this goes. Those of you who kind of follow me on Instagram or whatever kind of saw the pictures. I had like 900 records show up here on Friday, and there's a ton of pre-orders that need shipping and packing and whatnot. I made a bit of video about that. I just need to edit it, so that will be up in the next couple of days as well. But yeah, I just didn't get to actually do any melasm reading because it requires me to actually concentrate, and I'm already bad at it. And over the last couple of days I had so much going on in my brain that I just couldn't concentrate on it. But on the positive side, the 4th edition of Riddle of Steel Festival, which I'm kind of organizing, I'm the main organizing person there, is announced. So if you're in Germany and into epic metal, come by on the 4th of December. Oh, you don't have to be in Germany, you can just travel there. But if you want to join an epic metal festival, 4th of December, Marburg, Germany, show up and have a couple of beers with me, I guess, or just enjoy a bunch of really cool bands from, so far we've announced bands from Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Finland. So there's that. Anyway, now we're talking about Discworld, we're talking about Guards, Book 8 in publication order. And we had a chat yesterday, and now I'm going to, give my thoughts on why this is a really cool book and what to expect and why it is interesting. And the next one up will be Moving Pictures. That's book 10, because we already did book 9, because it's a rather short one, Eric, so I'll have a video on Eric in the next couple of days as well. But the next one you can join with a read-along is Moving Pictures. That's book 10 in publication order. And it's another good one to join because it's sort of a standalone. There's, overlap in characters, but it is basically a standalone novel. You don't have to have read anything before it, so it's a good, quick and easy introduction. As the title might imply, it is also very much a parody of the movie industry in Hollywood. So probably relatively accessible if you have any interest in, the movie industry and stuff like that. I'll link the Discord down below. I'd be very happy to have you all join me there and have a discussion in the chat, and then do like the Zoom call that we always do and hang out and talk Discworld, basically. Anyway, enough for now. Let's actually get into the book, shall we? Cheers. So, the quick spoiler-free part. Once again, it's not a review. There is one by Dr. Philip Chase that I haven't seen. Maybe check out that one. He knows what he's talking about most of the time, so that's good. I'll just give you like a quick rundown of why this is a really cool book to read, because obviously it is a book that you should read, and if I would give, if I would rate it, I would give it like 5 out of 5 Lindisfarnes, if that makes any sense. So let's let's go and talk about why this is a really cool book for you, and then we go into the spoiler discussion. Alright, book 8 in publication order, but the first one of the Nightwatch sub-series. Now, if you've ever looked at Discworld, you know by now that this is how Discworld works. You have the Discworld, and you have several, novels with recurring characters that sometimes build up some continuity and sometimes don't. The Nightwatch is one of the more popular or most popular sub-series. Another one would be the Wizards and the Witches. Those are like 3 main sub-series, with later ones like the Death and Susan sub-series as well. But this is the first novel in the Nightwatch series, so it's a good entry point to Discworld because it kind of starts a new sub-series. It is also the first novel that takes place completely in the city of Ankh-Morpork, so it has aspects of what you might call urban fantasy in a way that previous Discworld novels have not. And it is the first one that has that is very much plot focused compared to earlier novels. So it is I guess, easier to get into Discworld with this one, because it is closer to what you might call fantasy novel conventions in that it has a plot that is driving the novel forward. So you have all of that. You still have Terry Pratchett's humor, you have Terry Pratchett's very unique signature prose style, you have all the other things that make Discworld in general an absolute mayhem to read, but it might just be more accessible in a way to start with. So those are the reasons why you should read it. It is very much about, well, the Night Watch, a bunch of city guards that find themselves in circumstances way beyond their normal expectations and triumph in the end. It plays, as the cover blurb already says, with the idea that in most fantasy novels, well, not only fantasy, but in a lot of like entertainment, cops or city guards or palace guards or whatever are sort of the throwaway bad guys that just show up to be killed by the hero. And Pratchett decided to go and, well, give them a book to, show that they are people too, in a way. So if that appeals to you, you also like dragons, because dragons do kind of play a role in this one. This may just be your perfect opportunity to enter Discworld space and read more Discworld. So, once again, that's sort of like the non-spoilery part. Go read it, it's a lot of fun, and it's more accessible than later Discworld novels. Or earlier Discworld novels as well. So now let's get into like the spoilery, detailed discussion. All right, you're still here. That's great. So I assume you've either read Guards before, or you just don't care about spoilers. Both are fine, so let's have us a talk on why this is a special book, or what I think is important about this one. I kind of said it already, it is the first urban fantasy book in Terry Pratchett's series. Now this is important because just as Discworld has the sub-series of characters, it also has a bunch of like locations that show up a lot. You have Lancre, that is introduced mostly in in Weird Sisters. Also already starts with Equal Rights, which is that pseudo slightly Scottish or backwater English kind of kingdom with witches and odd folklore and stuff like that. And you have the city of Ankh-Morpork, which is introduced in the first novel, The Color of Magic, but then never, it's always there, and we have scenes set in that city, but with guards, for the first time we have an entire novel set in the city. And Terry Pratchett is really good at that, and you can see him, keeping that idea, and Ankh-Morpork becomes more and more the main focus of most Discworld novels in the future. Obviously, all the City Watch books are set there. Large parts of other novels are set there. The Truth, the Moist van Lipweg books, all of that stuff is set in Ankh-Morpork. So it becomes very much the main setting in Discworld. And that brings with it some very interesting aspects. One of them is that Guards is, at least so far, the most English, the most British of novels in the Discworld series. Now, obviously, Terry Pratchett is a British author using British English, and has always, in the first novels already, used idioms and stuff that are very much tied to that island over there in the West. He has always done that, but he does it way more in Ankh-Morpork, which is another thing where we can see the evolution of Pratchett's writing, because when we see Ankh-Morpork in the first novel, in Colour of Magic, and to a lesser degree in Light Fantastic, when we return to the city, Ankh-Morpork is very much inspired by the city of Longmar in Fritz Leiber's Nehwan Continent and Fafhrd and Grey Mouse's stories. That's where the inspiration comes from, and it has all of these aspects. It is very much chaotic, slightly over the top sprawl of a city where everyone is criminal, at least slightly criminal, and so forth. What we have now, beginning with Guards, is that these extreme side effects or these extreme aspects of Ankh-Morpork, the more parody parts of it, have been toned down, but it has become much more real as a city with aspects that we face in our cities in our day and age. By which I mean Ankh-Morpork becomes less Lankhmar and more London in a way, and the focus on very English, British English dialects and stuff in the way people speak in this novel is part of that. There's like a lot of like obscure slang that is very British slang that no one should know at this point. And it's something that I only noticed recently when rereading it, because obviously English is not my first language, so figuring out those nuances in like language and being able to allocate them to a specific place on the map that speaks English has taken a while, but compared to earlier novels, Guards is extremely British in its like whole depiction on language. It also means that the society depicted here is a lot more British. It has aspects that, while obviously they're in all kinds of places in, say, Western Europe, are uniquely strong in British society. One of them is that very hard distinction or difference between the upper class aristocracy and the lower class. Now, obviously, in most European countries, you have like vestiges of aristocracy. And you obviously have also a very high, you have an upper class that is just financially, like, just much more rich than anyone else. But I guess in very few countries outside of Britain, you have that idea that, like, old aristocracy is still that important. The idea of owning ground and having property and that connected to riches and having that property since 500 years or even older is very much a British thing, and it is one of the aspects of Ankh-Morpork society that is at least partly shown in this novel. So while we obviously have British dialect and stuff like that, we also have these fundamental conflicts of British society, that conflict between property owning aristocracy and everyone else who's slowly trying to make, their way through a place where it's basically impossible to buy land unless you're, very, very rich already through something else. And even in that case, the old aristocracy will look down on you as an upstart. Now, that will definitely be more important in later Discworld novels, again, but it is already put in here with the whole idea of character of Lady Ramkin, Sybil Ramkin, and everything around that. Which, ties in with that idea of breeding dragons as a a sport or hobby for the very, very rich, which is once again an aristocracy kind of thing, an aristocratic kind of thing that you have, I guess, with breeding dogs or anything like that. And Pratchett is a rather keen observer. I mean, I've said that before. Terry Pratchett is a really keen observer of human life and human behavior. And even I, who am not English and who have obviously not aristocracy and not very rich, through like my upbringing, I spent a lot of time with horses and in stables learning to ride and stuff like that. And I've met people like that in that, which is more of like a German hobby, I guess. Well, not only a German hobby, but you have it was closer to like than breeding dogs. But even I have met a lot of people that behave in that very weird way that you have, like Lady Ramkin or the Dowager Duchess of Quirm, focusing like their entire existence on breeding a specific kind of animal or dealing just with that in favor of dealing with humanity. I've met those people. They exist in a lot of ways. So it's one of those things that I find interesting, is like how closely Terry Pratchett is able to observe and describe these aspects of society without, just like outright condemning it, because yes, it is fundamentally a problem if you have a society that is split in like very, very rich aristocracy and poor everyone else. But he also manages to kind of portray the tragedy in that with these like smaller scenes about like Lady Ramkin, who has obviously is not very young and has obviously never had a well, she's an older single lady, and you have that idea like how sad that is, like how you have that kind of person that just goes and focuses all their attention on something else instead of the whole like love and romance part and stuff. And you have that especially also in like these classes, and he does that in I feel like a very humane way that is very interesting to me, because I've met people like that, and it's just fascinating how he does that, showing that it is kind of wrong and is a problem of a specific part of society, but also how it is actually very sad for the people involved. Now, obviously, that kind of goes out the window at the end because Sam Vimes gets Lady Sybil, and then things get interesting in the next couple of books on that count. All right, now the next big part, the idea of migration. We have had a first inkling of that with dwarfs in Weird Sisters when we have that first visit to a dwarf bar. We have more of that going on here, and it's made a bit more clear with the character of Carrot, who is human but also a dwarf because he was brought up by dwarfs. And now, as I said, this is something that I guess comes more with Morpeth becoming more like London and less like Longmore, because suddenly you have groups of immigrants living in that city trying to, in a way, keep their personal identity while also fitting in or not fitting in. And I feel you can, in a way, see the age of the book in that specific depiction, and it will be, the whole dwarf identity thing will come up again and again in Terry Pratchett's books and later books, because it is like the idea of identity, migration and whatnot is very much something that is a current topic. And what we see here with Morpeth becoming more like London, we also see Discworld becoming way more political. I mean, Pratchett is far away from stating personal opinions here, but he is certainly describing situations that are familiar to us and putting in the odd mild criticism here and there, of course. So we have that showing up for the first time. We also have like moral discussions, a lot of moral discussions in this one near the end of the book between Sam Vimes and Lord Vetinari, the patrician, with the question of whether there is good and evil or what makes evil evil. And Lord Vetinari, and this is a Pratchett thing that will come up again and again, and it kind of ties into the Stonewielder discussion that I had recently. The idea that evil, for the most part, is not deciding to do something evil, but not to say no to evil. And, acting is always better than not acting, which was sort of the point in Stonewielder. So we can see Pratchett being more open about political, philosophical, moral discussions in this book. And yet we also mostly have a very strong plot, a political plot to overthrow the government by, summoning a dragon, playing with mythology and expectations and legends by which, someone kills a dragon and is then obviously crowned king, and everyone falls for that, and so forth. The plot is ridiculous, but also really interesting, because what Pratchett does, once again, is to show how easy it is for us to follow legends and established narrative patterns. He does that obviously by, parodying it, But we're susceptible to that kind of thing. We're susceptible to narratives that have been told before. We like the idea of that underground of that underdog getting back his like former rights, because we don't want an underdog to actually win and become rich. We want someone to become powerful because he already earned it for some mysterious other reason. So we get that, I feel, as like one of the main takeaways from the novel, from Guards, is that we as humans are very easily fooled into believing something as long as it follows an established narrative pattern, which, once again, is something that we should look at when we, think about contemporary politics. What are the kind of stories that politicians that want our support try to tell us, try to conform to? And shouldn't we, maybe look at if that story is actually true? Just saying, that might just be an interesting takeaway from this novel. There's obviously others as well, but that's one of them, which obviously also allows Terry Pratchett to play a lot with all the cliches of lost heirs to the throne, whether it's your Aragorns hanging out in the forest handing on the sword and the birthmark and whatnot, or other aspects of like what we attach to kings in a way. Like the idea of the mythical king is one of those that will come again in Men at Arms and later ones as well. But it's an interesting aspect to see, like, is royalty, is being a king more than just having a job, which is, rule everyone? Is there like all this other stuff connected to it, what you might call divine right monarchy that you had in a lot of times? Like, are kings, just people with a specific job, or are they more than just human in a way? And that's a question that Pratchett wrestles with a lot, which once again is a very British concept, because even though you have monarchy in a bunch of countries on this planet, even in Europe, it feels like the British monarchy is way more of an established aspect or important aspect of British identity than it is, say, Danish or Dutch or Belgian or Norwegian or Swedish identity. Well, just saying. So it also leads to a bunch of really funny jokes about what we expect kings to have, and all these ideas of not being able to answer back, not having money, having that danger of your daughter catching a prick, and falling asleep for 100 years. All of that stuff is obviously in there and is funny, but there is that serious undertone, and it's one of the things that makes Terry Pratchett's writing, that makes Discworld so good, is that it is, on the surface, really funny, but when you actually think about why it is funny, there's always a serious question to ask here, which is the heart of really good comedy, in any case, but Pratchett does it really well here. Plus, one of my favorite, like, Beowulf jokes ever, when the monster hunters are complaining how difficult it is to be a monster hunter these days, and talk about the story of, like, someone killing the monster and sticking his arm up over the door, which is, what happens in Beowulf, and that his mum came and complained, the monster's mum, which, is still Beowulf, but it's a very specific way of describing Beowulf that I personally really appreciated, again and again. What else is interesting here? Obviously, there's, like, once again, Terry Pratchett's mastery at prose and description that is, like, while completely anachronistic and whatnot, is also extremely funny and poetic. That whole idea with the dragon, and when Vimes is, like, almost in awe of it, and then realism kicks in, and the idea to describe it as a group of brain cells from the wrong side of the synapses, scrawling his graffiti on the walls of wonderment. Now, you go and tell me that is not brilliant prose and description, and you're wrong. Objectively wrong. Same goes for that, like, incredible description of the sword with that main idea of, like, a steel club sandwich with the cutting edge of a scalpel and the stopping power of a sex-crazed rhinoceros on bad acid. That is pretty fucking brilliant, because you know exactly what he wants to say. It is also funny, and it still does the job. which is sort of the kind of thing that you also see in Douglas Adams' writing, I guess, which is sort of where you can see the parallels or the inspiration of Douglas Adams onto Terry Pratchett's writing a lot here. Then there's another important aspect, and that is obviously the conspiracy, the secret society of the elucidated brethren of the Ebon Knight, who are manipulated into using, summoning the dragon and doing all that stuff. And I found it very interesting how well Pratchett manages in like a very small. There's a very few sequences with those characters, and those are mostly comedic, for a fact. But he still manages, even in that group, to kind of establish social dynamics in a way that is just really well. You have the humdrum person going along, the really really downtrodden, spiteful person who feels always left out and is even kicked down further down by his brethren. You have the one person who tries to be second in command and just weasel his way as far up as possible. He manages in 3 or 4 scenes to actually establish all these social dynamics, and of course the idea of that secret society of the disenfranchised used by someone who is already in power to gain more power. Now that's something that I feel rings extremely true. It may even ring more true nowadays than it did back when it was written, because we have had our mostly right-wing populist leaders, or so-called leaders, doing exactly that, trying to get the already disenfranchised to trust them to do something. And it's whether it's here in Germany, your right-wing parties who are terrible, or it is your Front National in France, or your whatever UK Independence Party, or even partly your Tories at this point. But anyway, or your Donald Trumps, what have you. That's exactly that mechanism, and Pratchett shows it for the very, very cynical approach that it is, because it is fucking cynical from those people in charge, because those are never just also people's people in a way. They are never part of the people. They're always just using them. And that's fucking cynical. And Pratchett shows that in a comedic way that also rings very, very true, because it also shows how destructive that approach is. Because, half of the city gets burned down. Well, not half, but a lot of it gets burned down. A lot of people die. So there is, under that light-hearted comedic facade, there is a lot of serious analysis of contemporary political systems and society going on. Whether it's the all-encompassing greed of Morpork citizens that try to sell stuff to anyone, the idea of rampant capitalism in that aspect, whether it is the cynical use of people already in power of using the disenfranchised to gain more power in a cynical way, whether it is our disregard for the law whenever we need it. There's a lot of that stuff going on, whether it is our opportunism when we feel like we could gain something, when we have these ideas of the dragon is suddenly king of Morpork, and we come to the point where you have these people who well, actually that's pretty good, and we can use the dragon to burn down neighboring countries to get all their money. Isn't that great? And suddenly everyone is on board with that. See, there's a lot goes on here that warrants serious debate and serious thinking, but it is still highly entertaining and has a lot of extremely funny jokes in there. Plus your surrealist, absurdist humor with one of my favorite characters ever, which obviously is the librarian, doing all these interesting things, including becoming, doing a time travel, time traveling orangutan librarians is really cool. And even there you can manage to actually put serious stuff in there, which one of them is obviously the arrogance of humans towards animals. When you have the orangutan trying to communicate, and it's like, why do dogs and dolphins and other smart, so-called smart animals always manage to to communicate vital information in your like Lassie and whatever like kind of movies and TV shows of the 70s and 80s and 60s. Well, Lassie's out from the 50s, I guess. Saw that movie once ages ago. Anyway, communicate vital information to help, and an orangutan is not able to do that, and how stupid people are. Well, Pratchett manages to actually put a lot of meaning, a lot of information, a lot of interesting thoughts into his book, and it still makes it really funny. Now, do I feel it's the best Pratchett book? No. It is still one of my favorites because there's another thing that we haven't talked about yet that makes it, I guess, stand out compared to earlier books. And that's the character of Samuel Vimes, who is the most rounded character we've seen so far. Later on, there's a bunch more, but Samuel Vimes is a tragic character. He plays with a lot of cliches of your noir detective or hard-boiled detective. He is, like most of those, an alcoholic. But Pratchett manages to actually describe that alcoholism in a human way, in a humane way, where you understand why Sam Vimes is that way. You see him struggle with it. You see how it is holding him back. He is a flawed character that is never, compromised for a joke or anything, and that is something that is new because a lot of like older Pratchett characters are, at least in older books, are very much just symbols that are moved around to fulfill, certain roles. We see a bit of like that falling away with the witches in Weird Sisters. But with Sam Vimes, it kind of sticks out for the first time because he is so clearly our hero of the book, but also so clearly not a hero, but a very, very fallible human being. And that is just, another thing that makes, I guess, this book really easy to read, because it's so easy to just like Sam Vimes despite all his mistakes and all his faults. What else is important here? Well, obviously, the whole idea of narrative conventions and narrative causality that is slowly introduced here, with the idea that a million to one chance always works, because that's how that works. It's a million to one chance, but it might just work, and then it is certain that it will work. And the way he plays with those conventions, which are more making fun of how narratives work and what we are prepared to accept in movies or books to work, where, like, if you actually sit back and think about it, it's like, oh, that doesn't work at all. I mean, yeah, there's a small chance that it might work, but, if the chance is small enough in a story, it will work. As I said, it's one of those things that are extremely important for Terry Pratchett in his stories, in his writing, and his thought in general. Then I guess we also need to talk about the idea of the imagination and the dragons. Now, obviously, if you think back to the first novel, to Colour of Magic, you have the dragons there that are imagined into place by people with power and a place of high magic. So the concept of the dragon being summoned in that way is an old one. But Pratchett fills it with new ideas, one of them being that the person that summons the dragon has an influence on, or kind of shapes, the dragon that it summons. Even that was already kind of put into the first novel, when we have, into Colour of Magic, when we have Two Flower who believes in fantasy and all of that stuff. And it has a great imagination to summon a much more powerful dragony dragon than Liessa, who kind of doesn't really believe in him anymore. But he now twists that to the moral side. It's like, yeah, if you are a bad person, your dragon will also reflect your moral makeup. And then we come to that, like, very, very Pratchett-esque thing that is, most humans are just humans. And there's always a bit of dark, a bit of bad in all of us. That's just part of being human. Is you almost no one is an absolute saint, especially holy. But even if you're an average human, you multiply or you increase or whatever do with your like moral makeup when you summon that dragon. That dragon will be dangerous and dark and evil in a way. That's a fundamental Pratchett thing. To be aware of the fact that we as humans are just human. There's always dark in us, and we need to be aware of that and have that under control and under check, and not do something that will make it far too easy to give into that dark side of us. That's the warning in there. That is, once again, really important. Now, let's wrap it up with a few small other things. If you have read all the novels so far with me in publication order, you'll realize that Discworld is becoming more and more solid, and the references are getting better. Like, by which I mean within the corpus of the books. There's references there, like the dwarf sending to Mistress Garlic, the witch, to get to ask about spelling a word. That's a joke, of course, but it's also a reference to Margaret Garlic from Weird Sisters, so we have that connection to another part of Discworld. We have a lot of these kind of small informations there where people are mentioned that have shown up before when Sam Vimes is looking for a new job or not looking for a new job. And Lady Rampkin recommends the Duke and Duchess of Stohellit. Those are Mort and Isabel. You have all these small interconnections that make Discworld feel so alive and so real, because it's these throwaway sentences where you realize that this story is not taking place in a vacuum. And Pratchett manages to do that in this light-hearted and easy way without, connecting that small mention with a huge pile of information and world building. No, it's just if you've read the book, then you get the additional information. It's like, oh, that's the person who we're talking about. And if you haven't, you're just like, well, that's another duke in the next village who might just need a palace guard. Yeah, there you go. And I feel Guards is one of the books where that starts to shine even more. So, let's wrap it up, shall we? I feel Guards as a whole is one of Pratchett's best books, at least one of the best in the early series, because it kind of ushers in the next step in the evolution of Discworld and Terry Pratchett's writing. It first presents Ankh-Morpork as the major setting for the entire novel. It focuses even more on actually having a plot, and through the selection of Ankh-Morpork as a city makes it more like our world than it was previously, giving Pratchett the opportunity to deal with sociopolitical and other aspects of contemporary life in a way that earlier books weren't yet able to. So this is sort of what makes the next 30 Discworld books so powerful, because they build on that thing that is first introduced here in Guards, which is that even tighter connection to contemporary life. It also connects it more to England and makes it specifically more British than previous books, and gives Pratchett the opportunity to deal with very specific aspects and issues of British society. But yeah, apart from all of that, it's also just a really brilliant story with a lot of funny aspects, jokes, and whatnot in it. And definitely, if you only read a couple of Discworld novels, that always should be one of the books that you read. Alright, have you read it? Did you enjoy it? What do you think of it? Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, do all the beautiful things, and I hope I'll be back tomorrow with Orb Scepter Throne. I still have 70 shipping labels to print though, so that may take a bit more time. We'll see. Anyway, until then, cheers.